Hi, everybody. Eron Darryl again here with Fleetistics, and today we're going to be talking about maintenance and how GPS tracking platforms can be utilized for working on improving your overall maintenance. And Darryl, tell us a little bit about what goes into maintenance in some of these GPS platforms.
GPS platforms will keep track of three different items for you when it comes to maintenance that needs to take place, or just any kind of situation that you need to keep track of on a vehicle. It can be based on an elapsed number of miles. It can be based on an elapsed number of engine hours. It can also be based on a specific day. You can use these reminders. In some systems, it will generate a report that you receive once a week that'll give you a list of what's coming up. In other systems, it'll actually send you a notification based on a scheduled item. The ones that are associated with a specific day can be used to keep track of vehicle inspections, tag renewal, insurance renewal. When you're talking about the ones that the intervals are based on mileage, that would generally be associated with tire rotations and anything that your mechanics suggest be based on elapsed miles. And then the engine hours, we had one particular customer that their fleet, even though that they were running gas vehicles, and that's generally done by miles, they actually contacted the manufacturer because they were in a situation where the vehicles idled an inordinate amount of time. So the engine use was actually quite a bit more than it would be in a normal situation with miles driven. So once they contact the manufacturer told them that they should be doing an oil change based on so many engine hours. So the system was they were able to set up reminders within the system based on elapsed miles of when the next oil change should take place. Generally, once the reminder is generated, then a member of the staff would log in and state that it took place. And what that's going to do, once the oil is changed or the tires are rotated, that's going to immediately start the interval again for the next round.
One of the oddest scenarios that I've heard of in relation to what you're talking about was it was an oil and gas related industry, and they would rent the tractor trailers, right? They'd rent the tractors, the big semi trucks, and they would take them out to a field and they would park them and then run other equipment off of the engines of the tractors. So the tractors had like no miles and thousands of hours. So if it was only based on miles, they would turn these things back in, and the company running would be like, hey, you guys barely drove this at all. But in fact, no, they had thousands of hours, which obviously saves a lot of other components on the truck, like suspension and tires and things like that. But in fact, they had thousands of hours on the engines themselves. So that was kind of a unique situation. First time I'd ever heard of that. What happens when somebody starts to use a maintenance platform and they just got an oil change yesterday? Where do they go from there?
It's still possible to set up the notification because you can base it on the current miles. If the next situation takes place in 2,300 miles, you can base the interval on that. And then at the end of that, once the next oil change is taken care of, you can change the interval back to the standard 3,000, 5,000, whatever it is.
So if an oil change is getting done every 5,000 miles, and they just had one done 1,000 miles ago, they would go in and you would basically enter the current odometer. And if the GPS system isn't picking it up, you'd enter a current odometer and then say the next one's due in 4,000 miles. And once that was triggered and identified as being completed, then it gets on track and starts to schedule every 5,000 miles after that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And does this work for like equipment and vehicles, or in different assets like generators as well?
Yes, it will work in anything that you have a GPS device installed in. Mm-hmm. All of the systems that we offer have an equipment or asset tracker, as we call option available from a hardware perspective. It's not just about JBus, GPS devices, and OBD devices. We have customers that we've got one particular customer that has 70 units, and their units have never been installed in a vehicle. They're installed on industrial diesel pumps.
Right. What about like solar trackers? Are those going to work for maintenance?
Solar trackers, not as much because you're working with, it's not really wired into the vehicle. So when you're dealing with the ignition on, you're associated with vibration, whereas it's really it's more appropriate for an OBD, a JBus, or a three-wire device. When you're dealing with a three-wire asset tracker, the device knows when there's ignition on and when there's not. With a solar-based tracker, ignition on, ignition off is based on vibration, and it's generally not quite as accurate.
When a customer has a what we call a mixed fleet, they've got vehicles from 2, 3, 5 different manufacturers, and the OEMs are putting out some some tracking capabilities these days built into the vehicles that they can never get the parts to actually ship them. How does a customer manage maintenance when you have that scope of vehicles and the difference in the maintenance of those different types of vehicles? And then second part of that question is, how does somebody work with, they've got an OEM, a newer vehicle that's providing some maintenance information, and they've got older vehicles that have another 10 years on them. I mean, how do they manage all of that?
Well, that's the challenge of the OEM, vehicle tracking systems, GPS systems, whatever you want to call them. When you're working with an OEM solution, you're really starting to splinter the ability to have central management. For example, on an over-the-road trucker, International, Navistar has one system for their vehicles. I know that Cummins has a system for vehicles that contain their engines. Mack has one of their own. Volvo has their own. So when you're working with OEM, if you choose to go that route, you're really going to be working with 3 or 4 different systems as opposed to a central management system. That's one of the benefits of going with a true GPS system versus an OEM solution. Another challenge with the OEM solutions is that they're keeping track of the engine in the vehicle. When you're working with a fleet management system from a GPS company, you're able to use the information for, driver vehicle inspection reports are necessary in over-the-road truckers. It's a regulation. There's also ELD. There's the IFTA reports that are associated with gas tax. There's a lot of situations that rely on information or the trucking industry and the transportation industry uses that the OEMs are not really addressing at this point. So while it's great, you can buy hypothetically a General Motors or a Chrysler or a Ford product and not have to put a GPS device in it. You're also being hobbled in the sense that if you have a mixed fleet, you're going to have to view your data for GM in one system, for Ford in another system, for Chrysler in another. And the information that you get is not going to be consistent because each manufacturer is going to choose what they want to report. Whereas when you're working with a third-party GPS system, it's not just about the vehicle. It's also about the driver. It's about the regulation for running a vehicle on roads. Again, repeating what was already stated, IFTA for your gas tax, ELD for the hours of service regulations, and then DVIR for maintenance. All of that has to be done, and at this point, maybe down the road, and 8 to 10 years, the OEMs will catch up, but they're new to this whole GPS system. They've been doing it for a couple of years. The GPS system's been listening to customers for close to 20 years now. They know what customers need.
Yeah, I think the downside is that if still tying it to maintenance. If you are with one manufacturer but decide you're going to get a better deal from another in 2 years, all of your maintenance history and all of your tracking data and all that other stuff goes with your goes with your account with that OEM, or you're gonna have to export it and store it in Excel and create your own database. Whereas if you have an external device that is really vehicle agnostic, it doesn't matter, where it goes. It just goes in and starts to work, and it standardizes that information for you across all of those OEMs. So yeah, it's a little bit more expensive, but you don't have the downstream problems in data management and ownership that you might have otherwise. The other thing that pops to mind is, and I just forgot what it is.
Overall, I'd like to comment on what you were saying about a GPS system possibly being a little more expensive. When you consider that the OEM solutions are only giving you information about a vehicle, if you need ELD or DVIR or IFTA, because of regulation, you're going to have to get another system on top of your OEM. So I'm not exactly sure that when you add the two systems together, that an OEM solution would be less expensive.
Yeah, I just remembered, what happens when you can't get odometer from a vehicle, right? Let's say it's an older vehicle, it's not working for some reason, whatever the case is. How do you manage that maintenance situation?
For older vehicles, generally, vehicles after 1998 have an OBD port, which allows you to plug a device in. But in the agricultural industry, we know that they use vehicles that are quite a bit older. And, we have some vehicles out there that have been, that are 1992 models. So there's a 3-wire option for the OBD trackers that we have. And for other systems, we actually have 3-wire devices that allow you to connect to, power, hot, ground. And then the system itself is going to calculate the miles based on position. We call it GPS miles. It's actually calculating the miles from report position to report position. And it, one of the GPS miles are acceptable to NHTSA and all of the other agencies that require reporting based on mileage. They do accept GPS miles versus OBD or engine hour miles.
5-10 years ago, there was this transition period between tracking mileage by odometer or by GPS to tracking it by odometer. And historically, the GPS has always been more accurate because it's not affected by tire wear, transmission wear, age, all of tire size, things like that all kind of play into that. And then there were so many questions from customers about why doesn't your mileage match what I'm seeing on the odometer, that the GPS companies just basically gave up and said, you know what, we're tired of answering this question. Let's give them odometer information straight from the vehicle. And you know what, it's at least a working number that we can all agree upon is visible, even though it may be off a couple percentage points compared to the GPS mileage. That's okay. So now when you look at things, you typically will see where the GPS unit will pull the odometer information straight from the vehicle, so you can match what you're seeing in your report to what's on there. But when you start to get into those older trucks in vehicles or that off-road equipment, a lot of times the ECM stop working or the OBD ports break, or they get dirt in them, especially in some of the agriculture equipment, and you have the GPS mileage to fall back on. So if you're thinking about how to track your maintenance, especially as a small business that's growing up and your fleet is growing, you've got some really good basic tools to get you started down the fleet maintenance path, because it's such an important, expensive part of your business that you can dump a lot of money into your trucks needlessly. You may hang on to your trucks too long. You may keep them to the point where the expense curve starts to climb steeply at a certain age and number of hours or miles, and you can push that curve a little bit farther out through good maintenance along the way. But ultimately, what you're after by doing this is two things. One is to control your unscheduled downtime, right? You don't want breakdowns that you aren't aware are coming. Those are the worst kinds. If you're a trucking company and you have a truckload of, a real example, a load of flowers worth $100,000 coming from Seattle to Florida. If that truck breaks down and doesn't have power for 2 hours, you lost $100,000 worth of flowers, right? Or you have to get another truck out there and transfer cargo from one truck to the next on the side of the road. So it can be very, very expensive. And number two is that the cost of that downtime, you're not delivering, you're not generating revenue, you have employees and wages that are being paid. And so by being a little bit proactive, you can avoid very, very expensive situations in the future by staying on top of that maintenance. Now, as you grow and your fleet maintenance needs grow, then you need to look at more advanced platforms. But right out of the gate, there's a lot of things that you can do for the foreseeable future to keep those things under control.
Another thing that I'd like to add, it's an experience with a customer concerning odometer mileage or ECM mileage versus GPS mileage. I got a call from a customer on a Monday morning, and they were quite upset because on Friday, their GPS system said that it was for buses, charter buses, that the bus had 150,000 miles on it on a Friday, and then on Monday morning, GPS system was stating that it had 400,000 miles on it. Well, we did some checking around, and the system reported exactly what happened. Over the weekend, the bus was in the shop, and they replaced the ECM. And the ECM was used. It was from another bus, and the ECM started to report the mileage from that other bus. So because the actual odometer numbers had been skewed because of this situation, the GPS miles that were used by the system was a fallback. I mean, you actually had two different ways to get your mileage, so you weren't in a situation that would cause you to be out of compliance. This particular customer had charter buses that went across state lines, so they had to file IFTA reports, and IFTA reports require, mileage in, the odometer reading into a state, the odometer reading out of a state. So if they were basing it on ECM odometer only, they would have had problems because they just didn't have that information any longer.
Yeah. So that concludes our conversation today about fleet maintenance. If you enjoyed the videos, please hit the like button and subscribe. And we will see you on the next video. We appreciate your time. Thank you and have a great day.